Dr. Drenser, why don't you start off with that one?
I was going to say, I'll start with that one. So, ROP has really improved from a number of reasons, and not just because of our interventions, but also because of neonatal care. Such improved care and understanding of what's necessary and not necessary for a premature infant. So there are a lot of factors that went into that. I would definitely agree that FEVR's a little behind the 8 ball compared to ROP in understanding tempo and progression and interventions. But we certainly have learned a lot about early intervention that, as Dr. Capone mentioned about, talking about, other diseases, there's the early phases and the late phases. And we always are more successful when we have early identification of fever in early intervention of fever, because we are able to stop or decrease at least the long-term secondary effects that oftentimes are the true rate limiting steps in preventing true vision loss. With that, we also are understanding better the genetics, and the genetics are complex. There are a lot of different genes, a lot of different pathways that are overlapping and affected. But what we've been able to determine is that some of these mutations tend to have more problems with leaky vessels. And so they tend to be more aggressive with exudation and bleeding and lipid accumulation. And other mutations tend to be a little bit drier with less leaky vessels, but they tend to have sometimes more folds or more capillary loss and more ischemia associated with them. So as we understand these correlations better, we are getting more sophisticated with the management, the interventions. The biggest issue is also too that most of the time, the first family member identified is identified fairly late stage disease when they really are having significant vision problems. So we've found also that siblings and family members that are screened and are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, we're better able to control because we're intervening at an earlier time point.
Yeah. So I would make comments along similar lines. I think much of the progress in retinopathy of prematurity, kind of really picking up the thread that Dr. Drenser is speaking to, has been in addressing risk factors that lead to disease and minimizing them. So whether it's making sure that the children's lungs function as effectively as possible with a drug called surfactant, or whether it's really tailoring the oxygen so that the children get kind of all that they need but nothing more, which our monitoring and delivery of oxygen is much more sophisticated than it used to be. So it's largely those aspects that have decreased the incidence and severity of ROP. We don't really have that opportunity in fever, in minimizing the things that sort of render the clinical features of fever. They are largely, as Dr. Drenser said, genetically determined. So therefore, the main thing that will likely impact on fever is detection of disease at an early phase, and that's really going to require awareness. Fever is, I think, as many of the people watching this are aware, what we call an orphan disease. And orphan disease is a term that's used to speak to conditions that are just really, really, really rare. And so if they're rare, then a lot of doctors aren't going to have experience with them, and what you do often, you do well, what you see often, you're familiar with. And since this is not something people commonly encounter, I think particularly milder forms of fever go undiagnosed. So increasing awareness of fever, and I think this has parenthetically significantly improved in over the last 20 years. I think people are much more aware of fever. Lord knows we talk about it plenty and have done our bit to raise the profile of fever, but increasing awareness so that earlier phases of it's recognized that earlier phases of disease and interventions happen earlier. That part would dovetail, with ROP, where ROP risk factors are well recognized and they are addressed very early in the course of disease, so that prevention is really the most effective therapy.